Greetings, friends. My name is Jessa McLean, and I'm here to provide you with some blueprints of disruption. This weekly podcast is dedicated to amplifying the work of activists, examining power structures, and sharing the success stories from the grassroots. Through these discussions, we hope to provide folks with the tools and the inspiration they need to start to dismantle capitalism, decolonize our spaces, and bring about the political revolution that we know we need. Welcome to Inside the NDP, Controlled Conventions. We have done a lot of podcast episodes about Inside the NDP, but this is the first time we've actually dove deep into conventions specifically.
We've done so many of these types of spaces over the last few years where we're giving people space to talk about the issues they've had in the NDP, and we've had hundreds upon, well, actually thousands, over 1,000 people attend these events. So here we are again, 2023, doing another one, covering a lot of the same issues we've been covering for a few years now. So it's going to be interesting because I've been having a lot of conversations with people about the things that have been brought up and we focused on before and getting updated on them now because of the recent news that brought forward this live stream. And it's amazing how things have gotten worse within all iterations of the NDP.
Yeah, and that's really
almost like it's purposeful.
That's really why we ended up jumping on and throwing this together kind of last minute, was because of the decision by the NDP. One person in particular decided that despite all the best efforts of members that it would be in person. So yeah, that started us asking all the same questions we always ask, why, to what purpose? And that's because we know convention is a terribly orchestrated event that is anything but what people generally expect. So what you can expect from this evening is there's a few themes that are going to be persistent in our discussions, and one real hypocrisy that's worth pointing out before we start, right? Politics are inherently hypocritical. But the themes are that really convention has predetermined outcomes that are necessary according to the leadership, right? Everyone goes into convention with their own agenda. Members, usually it's to better democratize the party or showcase a really good resolution, like a policy idea. Or maybe they want to be involved in the party, so they're going to run in an election. But for the party itself, it's not that at all. It's a showcase. It's a time to raise money. It's a time to highlight very specific profiles, people, and policies, right? What they already want you to be talking about. And so as a result, they have fine-tuned their ability to control these spaces so that it is exactly what they expected and not what generally members want, which is like discourse, right? So a real lack of democracy is another theme that all the guests that we have on will share with you, like very specific stories on how it's a very top-down approach that each party, federally, provincially, they have a director that decides everything convention, everything, with a small circle of people that advise them. But generally, it doesn't matter what the members do, how many petitions they sign, even if they have an executive that disagrees with them. We've documented in one episode in particular, the People's Party. We spent a considerable amount of time there. That episode was like 2 hours. Santiago, I'm so sorry. I didn't really, I went looking back at it and I was like, did we really go on for that long about how anti-democratic the party was? We had like 3 different people come on and give very personal experiences, but they were concrete examples of one person overruling many in what people consider a democratic institution, right? It's in the name and it's anything but. So when I ran for party president at one of the conventions that we will talk about, the theme of my speech and like the theme again of this discussion will be the fact that the party always chooses control over access. Right. And when you're building progressive movements, if you've listened to our show at all, or you understand activism or effective organizing, including as many voices as possible is your ideal scenario, right? If you actually want to move forward. we've provided enough evidence so far that tells you that the NDP does not want what we want in terms of a political revolution. So why we're talking about convention, which might be like a small niche in partisan politics, is because it is very demonstrative of the whole, everything that's wrong with the party, right? The fact that it's controlled by people who don't struggle the same way that you and I do, that don't see the same future, and who have no scruples in terms of being leaders at all. And that sounds really harsh, but when you hear all the things that we're going to have to say in the next 2 hours, you're going to just understand how manipulative and authoritarian the party really is, just by examining on how they control convention, a single event that's supposed to come every 2 years. Sometimes it's 3, because it doesn't really matter what the Constitution says it's supposed to be. It's whatever's convenient for head office. We gave a great example on the Ontario Convention being delayed an entire year just to secure Andrea Horwath's next kick at the can. So again, that director controls convention in a way that suits their vision for the party. Fuck what members want. So
another thing, just to clarify, at the federal level and in some provinces, it's called the director, and others it's called the secretary. And also the structure and the bullshit we're going to talk about just surrounding convention is replicated when it comes to nominations, when it comes to riding associations, council, everything. It's the same playbook, and it's shared through every iteration of the NDP. So don't look at this and go, oh, what's going on in Ontario is horrible. We don't have that in Alberta or Saskatchewan or whatever. Yes, you do. And no, it's not just partisan politics. It is replicated in the structure of party politics, but within the NDP, it's a very specific flavor, when there should be no bad taste for being a part of this. So it's not just about convention. It's not just about one person, a director or a secretary. These people also have influence and support during your nomination period. Complete control. If you're going up against this person in your province or your territory, you're actually going against this whole support structure that they have, which is wholly dedicated to preventing democracy in the party.
For sure. And we have guests on from BC that are going to give you very, clear examples of this. And again, we can always throw back to another episode of the Candidate Crisis that describes exactly what Jay's talking about, the extent of power that exists with a single person. And that's the reason we talk about too, is some people want to know why, why do they have an ulterior motive? What is so important about the internal elections, or what debates hit the policy floor? And not only is it, what I mentioned before, being able to control the narrative and what they see, but forming that executive, because in theory, the executive that's elected at convention could actually hold head office accountable, could actually hold the paid consultants that are unelected in the party to task when they fail to represent, what the party actually stands for, when they don't adhere to the policy book and whatnot. And so it's important that from the standpoint of the spin doctors that run the party, that whatever we talk about on the floor is, friendly discussion. We're not infighting. We're keeping exactly with what the leader had planned to highlight in the legislature or whatnot. And then also they have an executive that reflects their needs, that are, beholden to them to a certain extent, who want to get higher in the party and know what that means. That means you keep your mouth shut and you vote yes, and you ask as few questions as possible. Because, again, we've documented so many circumstances where people do get successful at convention. They get elected on the executive. Jay is an example of this, and their efforts are thwarted every turn right? So it's much, much easier if they just control convention and then therefore have that predetermined outcome, so that there are no ruffles in the party. And some people might think that that's cool, right? I face some resistance online when talking about, making convention more accessible or throwing our hands up in the air as to like, what is the point? But, like it's supposed to raise money. It's supposed to highlight the party. It is a media opportunity, but, folks are just so starved for debate. Like Santiago's, before we started recording, he's like, I would just love to debate. I would just love to, I almost want to run as a candidate. So I want to debate. And like that, a lot of leftists are like that. So a lot of people go into convention and they're like, I want to talk about this. And I have the perfect New Deal or, amazing ideas to democratize the party, right? Everyone's got kind of a horse in the race. And the last thing we'll talk about this evening will be like the aftermath, how people come out of those spaces after expecting this. They experience what we're going to show you, right? Shit, right? Terrible, chaotic, Hunger Game style shit. And the impact that has on them, on Canadian politics, so then on the party in general, and it's not good. It's not good. So I hope they make a lot of money from these conventions because I only see them damaging the party, right? Like I don't, you guys see any wins coming out of these conventions or?
I tried to find out if there were certain incentives. So does the director get a certain cut if there's this many people or this much money raised or so on and so forth? But somehow in a democratic party, there's no way to actually find that type of stuff out. But as for wins, yes, because it's the annual, what convention is it's like the Olympic torch, where it is the passing of the gaslighting and the official lighting of the gaslight for the next couple of years. So that's the only win, is they rekindle the gaslighting for a new wave.
That's a sarcastic win. Yeah, so what to expect for this evening, we're going to have guests kind of come in and out, and we're going to walk through just why convention, like my notes literally, what does the party think it is? I've talked about that, they think it's an opportunity to just showcase. You don't get a lot of immediate exposure. What do members expect? I think, each one of us will talk about that a little bit, but generally we've covered that. Like we expect democracy, we expect fairness, equity, to be heard. Other things like in-person conventions is like to have a little bit of fun, a little schmoozing, networking, right? Those are legitimate reasons to go to convention because again, the party doesn't really connect us outside of convention either. This is really your only chance to talk to other writings to see how miserable they are too. And then in reality, what is it? And it's shit. Like, I don't know, I probably end up say that word a lot and then why is it shit? One, it's hard to get there. And when we talk about accessibility, we're not just talking about like wheelchair accessibility, which I've had a few people tweet at me that the last in-person convention was actually really difficult to get around, the last federal convention. So it's like, even if you go down to all of these levels of accessibility, it's awful. And considering it's not the conservatives, it's not the liberals, it's supposed to be what it's like a grassroots movement, the working class party. And it's one of the more inaccessible conventions, right? If you remember, like even our leadership race, is not as wide open as other parties as well. So it's a real contradiction. And sometimes I struggle with why, why do they control access? I think in ways that are more than other parties is because there's not an activist element as much in the other parties that are fighting to shift the narrative. There's some elements within the conservatives that want to bring up some really awful policies and I'm sure they have their day at convention and whatnot, but liberals are generally complacent and happy to just settle for whatever discourse is provided. They're middle of the road policies anyway, but there's real radical element that we have to acknowledge amongst the NDP. I would have considered myself one of those when I was a member. It's not a slight. And they want so much more, right? Something that the head office is not willing to give, right? They're not willing to say the word socialism. They're not really prepared to act like anti-capitalists. And there's a strong contingent within the NDP that are socialists, that want very specific policies that will push the Canadian narrative to the left. And so the NDP, in order to stay on their centrist track, need to suppress that element, right? Like in a way that other parties don't. So although you would expect something more broader, welcoming, progressive from the party, you get the opposite. And I think that's why it scars so bad, right? You have a lot of empaths. I know that word's a little bit overused, but like it takes a certain kind of individual to be an activist, right? To fight alongside people, to care about challenging the status quo. Those kinds of people don't want to go into spaces where they're told they're a nuisance, where they're preached to, like the choir. That's one of my biggest pet peeves of almost all of these big meetings for the NDP is, you know, you get these leaders up there and they're literally telling you to vote for them. Like, and why you should vote for them over, you know, Doug Ford, for example. And it's like, are you kidding? We just paid a couple $100s to be here. We're sold. You know, like, let's talk about how we can actually change. I see this even from some Toronto candidates when they're addressing, I won't name anybody, but like when they're addressing people that have shown up to canvass for them and they're like talking about why we need housing. Like those fucking people know why you need housing. They're spending their weekend knocking on doors for you. They tell them why they're important. Tell them how they're going to make a difference. Like, anyway, there's not a lot of inspiring stuff that goes on at these conventions. Jay, what's your pet peeve about convention?
How it's all a fucking lie. So all of the things that I was told what convention is, it's this amazing time where you get to meet these amazing like-minded people fighting for change and so on and so on. And then you get there and it is the Hunger Games, where we could have been working together amazingly and been talking nonstop 2 weeks before convention. But at convention, no, fuck you. I need my thing. I need my chance. I need my favors or my supports or my, like, whatever. The toxic partisanship bubbles to a boiling point. So when I entered convention, I was expecting to have input either on the mic or through voting. I was looking forward to seeing some amazing people debate some amazing things. But no, it was just this Lace put in here, it's time for brass to grandstand. There was so much of the stuff you're talking about where the leader is sitting there campaigning to the members. It's a whole bunch of bullshit. And I thought that was when members, it is the members' opportunity to have their input in the party. But yet, no, it's sit down and if you carry favor, you can partake. And there is a question from Peter Zanetti. Is there a good model? Because we've talked about a lot of the bad things and we're going to be going in depth, but is there a good model as to how a policy convention should be run? This would include pre-convention policy, vetting procedures, transparency, etc. Because we talk about what they think, what the party thinks it is, what members think it is, and what it should be under the Constitution. But then there's, if you look at our event that we did, it was a virtual, what was it called? It was this virtual platform, like an 80s video game, where our convention was so accessible and in-depth and fun. So there are definitely ways to do it. And it shouldn't have to be every couple of years. Policy should be a very active.
For Peter's question, we'll work that into the entire episode too, right? Because like that's a long answer. So whenever we're critiquing what we're experiencing, let's be cognizant to add an alternative, because we've worked on this, right? Like Jay, you're talking about making things more accessible. We're going to call Kristine out of the waiting room in just a minute. She's going to talk about efforts to make it more accessible, lowering costs, lowering the threshold. Before we call her in, though, I wanted to give people a quick rundown on right now what it takes to get to convention. You can't just be an NDP member and be like, hey, convention's coming up. Where do I sign up? No, it's definitely not that easy. You need to find your local riding association if they're active. Then you need to make sure you are notified when there is a general meeting, and they do not throw those very often. They do come fast and furious around convention time because there's certain things you have to get done, right? A riding association has to give certain notice for these meetings to happen. And then when you go to this meeting as an eager member who wants to participate in convention, you're going to have to convince your riding association to send you as one of their delegates. And if you're in a riding like mine, York Simcoe, where we are not, it's a conservative stronghold. We still have NDP members here that are, active, but we get 2 delegates. So chances are people who are already involved with the riding generally get those spots. Better ridings do open that up to newcomers. Hopefully they warn them what to expect, but it's limited. So let's say you finally do secure one of those delegate spots, right? You navigate through those processes. Unless you are unemployed or underemployed, it's going to cost you a few $100s. It was even a few $100s to participate virtually. Now, the next federal convention is in Hamilton. So you would need to travel to Hamilton. You would need to find accommodations and take time off and attend convention. Then, as a delegate, you would then try to get to the mic, in order to truly participate, or perhaps you're entering in the election. So there are already barriers in place to folks, mostly economical, so that who ends up shaping what comes out of convention, although we'll tell you it's contrived and predetermined anyway, even the people who have a shot at doing that generally are of a certain class already, right? People who have the free time, the money, and the political knowledge to navigate how to do that, right? You can't just wait until convention's really buzzing like a month before. You will not get a delegate spot. Those general meetings have already been called.
Before that, I want to catch up on a couple of comments.
Oh, good.
So I came to the NDP because of Jack Layton, for anyone who doesn't know, but have since become a hardcore socialist. I wish the NDP would get its act together and become socialist again. Lace is saying, I'd say an ongoing, and this is so unbelievable. So I'd say an ongoing virtual accessible convention with multiple times and dates to join and have your voice heard. A convention of the commons that is basically always happening, which makes sense, which is an incentive for members to continuously be active and take part. But it only makes sense from a member point of view, not from the party point of view. And I personally want to make sure people understand a lot of these things are very purposeful. The party knows this. They know how to reach out to people for 100,000 donation emails a year, but they can't ask, hey, do you want to have input on this thing? So, and then the fact that they Ali says, the fact that they still charge that much for a virtual meeting is abysmal. Honestly, a motion I had tabled before I left in the Ontario NDP to find out the cost differential between virtual and in person. It cost between $15,000 and $35,000 more to exclude people by having it in person. Sorry, I kind of went on a long rant there.
No, it's important that we include those perspectives. And to the first commenter, we're actually working on a special that's specific to the erasure of socialism from the NDP, from messaging, from policies and general direction, and how frustrating that is. So stay tuned for that. A lot of people, maybe in their first experience, give the benefit of the doubt. For example, at the last virtual convention, the chat is turned off. And this is now a common practice in council meetings. So, we've all used Zoom at this point. We know how to work it, especially organizers, how to manage rooms and whatnot. And it's purposeful, right? When we're in our virtual spaces, those chats are cut off for the same reason ridings aren't connected. It's so that we can't organize with one another effectively, right? So we can't be heard when we're not like at the mic. And in an in-person convention, it's funny because I think that they can actually control virtual a little bit more, even though they've denied that as an option. I know that you have to travel to Hamilton now in order to get your say, so you have to be super enthusiastic about it. But, those virtual conventions were something else where you were completely cut off from everybody else. You weren't on the floor. You couldn't see who's at the mic. You couldn't rally really behind anybody. There's no applause to see how the room felt about what was said. They were not ideal. And so, Allie, the idea we paid hundreds of dollars just for that, and to experience such tight control was just really demoralizing for a lot of people.
I do want to say, Stanley Lee is saying proximity bias for the win. That's the best way for them to accomplish what they're trying to accomplish for now.
Well, Ontario generally has, a pretty good track record in terms of conventions going their way. We've had some surprises. I was telling the crew here before we started, there's not going to be a lot of hopeful moments in this broadcast, which, we don't like doing, but folks will remember that Tom Mulcair was blindsided at a convention. He did not expect to lose the leadership review vote. And that was behind the scenes organizing. Mind you, there were parts of the establishment that were okay with this. And so it was facilitated to some degree. But, organizing went on, surprises were had. So you never do know. But I generally just caution people away from getting their hopes up in terms of making a difference in the party at conventions, even if they do get there. I'll go back to Peter's question on, and Lace brought it up, a people's convention. We've toyed with many different ways, from how you structure the microphone, who can speak at the microphone, preferencing first-time speakers. One of the things that drives me crazy about convention is the amount of time and space that are allotted to people who already have giant platforms. So not only will you have your leaders' speeches, which are huge blocks of time in the agenda, but then they are the first people at the mic. MPs, MPPs, union leaders are somehow in person. I understand how they get to the mic first. There's a coalesce. Everyone's like, oh, look, Jamie West is here. Go ahead. You speak on, this. You're the critic. It makes sense. People are starstruck a bit. They get that first shot at the mic. But virtually, it was so fucking obvious that they were manipulating behind the scenes when it was supposed to be first person who hit, con mic, pro mic would have been the first person in line in your Zoom room. And lo and behold, Charlie Angus is first on the mic. Fred Hahn is first on the mic. You name it. And so in this space where members have paid hundreds of dollars to show up, they are given the least amount of space. And a shout out to the Socialist Caucus, which I know drives everybody nuts at convention. We're not going to spend a lot of time on that. They have their tactics. They have been effective sometimes, but they face so much slack for their behavior at convention. But every single time, and it's supported by so many people, and then it's brought up in provincial council and over and over again, is extending the amount of debate time at convention. That's the first motion. I quizzed, who was it? Was it Jay? At Jay, I was like, you better pass this test, right? What is the first motion that's always called at any NDP convention? And what is it?
To extend the time.
Yes, right. To amend the agenda. I, put forth a motion to amend the agenda, and the chair is just no. Just no, we can't. It's not possible.
We can't sacrifice our MPs or MLAs or MPPs or our leaders filibustering this member event for you to have input in this party. Come on, that's just ridiculous.
It felt particularly ridiculous in the virtual space just because there's no real reason to limit the amount of time. You can just keep going as long as it takes. In person, I understand, people have places to get to and whatnot, but it was just really obvious that they wanted to limit the amount of time as much as possible. And it was just the most frustrating experience possible.
It pissed me off how blatantly obvious it was. And that's why that was the first time I really noticed hyper-partisanship and how fucking toxic partisanship is, where it's everyone can see this. Everyone can see this. The person who cuts it off, the conversation's going, because it was virtual, there was 80,000 groups on Facebook, on Twitter, and here, where people are talking and reacting to things. And it's someone points out one of the bullshit things. Oh my, they're just wasting time. No, the filibustering MP who wants to spotlight on C-SPAN or whatever it is that plays it, they're the issue. And to the tune of, I think it was the provincial one, I had called for the orders of the day, which means we have to stop what's happening and get onto the agenda timeline. But it was Jagmeet who was speaking when I called for the orders of the day, and the panic and the pissed off reaction begging me not to do the motion. It's so obvious, and no one calls it. If you call it out, you get attacked.
Let's transition back to, because I see like Kristine's now, she's listening in. When we're talking about like getting to convention being hard and generally inaccessible to a huge portion of the membership, we have to think of how many people put their hopes in the NDP to, lift them out of legislative poverty, to mandate a higher minimum wage, right? Like a lot of poor folks really count on the NDP, and convention is just not an option. And the way that the party is designed, there are really no other avenues for participation. So again, it was such a tightly controlled space. It was unique, the last federal election, in that how many people could actually participate, especially federally. Like imagine the travel that is involved with a country as large as ours. And the fact that it only happens once every blue moon, right? Once every 2-3 years. To limit that is just so frustrating, because the technology is certainly there. First, we shouldn't have to wait 2 to 3 years. I say we, I'm not a member anymore, but people shouldn't have to wait this long to have policy discussions, right? Low budget town halls, virtual. This is so doable, and it's done by grassroots organizations across the country. Very few people have not adopted a hybrid version into their gatherings at this point, at least more progressively minded ones, right? Some folks gave us examples of hybrid conventions that they had just gone to and how they were a success, right? There was meaningful participation. So right now the NDP have ruled that it will be in person only with some virtual components, but they made it clear that to vote, to debate, and to take part in the elections, right, to be a candidate, means you will have to be there in person. There won't be any exceptions. And, I imagine this is not sitting very well with members.
I do want to say, for anyone who doesn't know and hasn't been to convention is supposed to be the members' event, run by members for members to take part, but it's wholly controlled by anything but the members.
Jay, can you play what Melissa Sam sent to us from Newfoundland and Labrador? Melissa has quite a lot of experience with the NDP, and they wanted to participate, but again, we threw this together last minute, so we were lucky enough that they sent us a statement that we could just air, and I would like, perhaps, if Kristine can hear it, maybe react to what Melissa has to say here.
It was extremely disappointing to see the decision made by the federal NDP executive to not facilitate a virtual option for the upcoming convention. Having the virtual option during the last federal convention was absolutely revolutionary. People who couldn't participate in the democratic processes of the party were able to engage for the first time for many members, creating an inclusive space for disabled, rural, and low-income people. It created a way to engage in the power structure of the party at a meaningful level for people who would otherwise not feel able or safe. We need a way for marginalized individuals to not just be included, but welcomed and prioritized. We need a way for everyone to have their voice heard in and by the new Democratic Party. We need an equitable way forward and a just system of governance. Without the opportunity for all members to engage, we are neither just nor equitable. This is not hard to do. I just attended my credit union's AGM online because we have 11 branches across roughly 1,500 kilometers. All it takes is a Zoom account. Polls are built in as our breakout room functions. It is easier than ever to plan and execute a virtual or hybrid event. Being exclusionary like this completely contradicts our own values, and this decision has effectively extinguished my hope for the future of the federal NDP. We need to practice the principles we preach as a party, the ones baked into our foundations as the Union and Cooperative Party: democracy, equality, equity, solidarity. We need a convention accessible to all members.
I want to also note that a lot of people hear, Jesse, you kind of touched on it. A lot of people hear accessible and they think a disability accommodation. Accessible means accessible. So if you don't know how to take part, you can't access information. It's not accessible. If you can't take time off of your job, it's not accessible. If you're in school, if you're a student member, you can't ditch school, you can't go for whatever reason, you are no longer welcome in the party, because the same accommodations they have afforded themselves, the government has afforded itself this accommodation to keep running. The party would have been insolvent if it just decided, screw everything. Jesse, you talked about the federal election. There were, and this is the point I raised as an executive, that there were attendees from all over, coast to coast to coast, at random little ridings nomination meetings, donating and spreading and supporting. How do you choose to, or why do you choose to exclude all of those members? And that's the question that's the most important, because like it's been brought up, these are choices because the solutions are quite easy.
Yeah, I thought I'd pop on. I think that's a good segue. It was really powerful to hear Melissa's message there. Do you want me to introduce myself, or has that been done?
Please do.
Okay. So my name's Kristine Wickner. I'm actually an elected member of federal council. So I'm elected to council as a BC women's rep, and that happened at the last virtual convention that Melissa was referencing. And yeah, I think it needs to be reiterated that that was a very exciting convention for a lot of folks, because people were able to participate. You know, as a mom with young kids, I don't know if I would have been able to make a trek to a convention like that. And I'm facing similar, obstacles when I think about having to get to Hamilton in October. And so I want to make it clear that I'm not speaking on behalf of the party at all. That's not that's not my place to do. But I am speaking as somebody that, expected to represent women of British Columbia. And so when Jay started talking about, the need, and we started talking about this right away after convention, right, Jay? Like, you started talking about how, first of all, Jay started talking about how there were problems with the convention, right? As amazing as it was that so many people could access it, it was a bit messy for sure. The party definitely wasn't ready for that many people to be attending. And I think they weren't ready for that many grassroots members to attend. And I think we kind of scared them.
100%.
And so Jay started working hard on, there were some accessibility issues. There was a committee formed afterwards about, making sure that didn't happen again, that we would have an accessible convention in the future. I don't know, Jay, you could speak better to what kind of ended up happening with that committee. But then at a certain point, I know you started trying to bring resolutions forward to council to get us to approve the virtual nature or to make it hybrid. And it just kind of got caught up in committee work and committee bureaucracy. So they made Jay's resolution come to us on the policy committee, which I sit on, and they sort of coordinated so that we referred that to federal council, who then referred it to this accessibility committee that isn't really very active. And people said that at federal council that, how is an accessibility committee that's not really meeting or active going to make this decision? And so then the next thing that we heard after that federal council meeting where we referred it to the accessibility committee, and there were so many concerns from so many people about that, the next thing we heard, and the national director had announced to the Ontario provincial council that it was not going to be hybrid, that it was going to be in person, and that there was going to be hybrid components. So there's a lot of us on federal council that are very concerned and confused about how this decision was made. Like, we were told that there was going to be one process followed, and then all of a sudden we heard from the grapevine that a decision had already been made. And we're left thinking, okay, like, constitutionally, we're supposed to be the deciding body. We're supposed to be making these decisions between conventions. And it's unfortunately another example of my experience with the NDP, where they keep elevating the levels of control to a smaller and smaller number of people. So whether it's in the BCNDP, where the provincial council is supposed to be the governing body between convention, and yet more and more powers are being given to the executive, this seems to have happened without even. Yeah, we're still confused as to how this decision was made. And we're confused about the reason, and it's like trying to figure out why, like, their logic and their rationale of not hosting it is kind of like nailing Jello to a wall. Like, because we've never had it officially on an agenda, and we've never been able to debate it, it becomes this very, like, it's like a rumor mill. I hear that Anne said this in one meeting, and so said this in this meeting. And then sometimes people just make stuff up on their own, like, oh, well, it's probably too expensive. And, there's answers to all of those questions. Like, Melissa's dead on when she says the logistics shouldn't be a problem. The finances shouldn't be a problem. I mean, it's about priorities for sure. One of the things that, so frustrating. One of the things that was in the email to federal councils was like, this would have taken so much member consultation to decide on this. And it's like, yes, that's why we started talking about it 2 years ago. So we could have done that member consultation. And hi, I'm like the federal council member for BC, like for women in BC. Give me a list of the members. I'll call them. I'll do my job to represent women, but there's no mechanism for me to represent people. So where we're at now is the decision has technically been made, but that's why I started the petition. There is a petition online to sign and say that you're in support of this. And because I just want people to understand that there are people on council and the executive that really are sticking our necks out for this. And we really want to make this happen. We really strongly feel that in order to win and form government, which is what we should all be trying to do as member of the council and executive and leadership, that we need to engage our grassroots members. But we need folks to also, we need to show them that we have that support. And that's where the petition comes in. Please make sure that if you haven't signed that yet, that you do. And because there's other things that I can do there as well. As soon as you sign the petition, I know what province you're in, the EDA that you're in. I can connect you to the folks that you should be lobbying to. So your federal council, regional representatives, if you're part of a caucus or something like that, I can connect you to them and make sure that they know how important this is to you and this issue is, because I think that's what the party is not doing, is they're not teaching people how to use the mechanisms that are actually in place to make your elected officials work for you. They should be doing their jobs representing what you want for the party. And regardless of whether we win on this issue, it is a grassroots issue, and we need to start, sticking together on things like this, I think. A lot of people are hesitant, which I'm sure you've talked about, to sort of put themselves out there on the side of, and I don't even like to talk about sides, but, people are hesitant to really speak out publicly because sometimes they get a target put on their back. But there's good, solid support for this issue in particular, and I would really encourage people to help us get that base so we can make our case.
On the petition, the most important thing for me is if you share a petition, you share it at your riding, you share it in your networks or whatever. I had a lot of people, when I resigned my roles, a lot of people reached out in shock, but it's because they were following what I was doing and supporting what I was doing in the shadows. It was basically sacrificing me and hoping that it accomplished the thing that they were supporting me in accomplishing. Get behind the petition, but I want to ask, and Jessa, I'm sorry if this is the question you had loaded. You said it's not about necessarily being successful or getting everything you want. It's about connecting along the way. But what is the point if they're not going to make it accessible? They're basically telling a large amount of their marginalized members that they are going to be further marginalized within. So at what point do you say, be safe, this isn't safe, or let's keep fighting? Sorry if I didn't articulate that well. I'm trying to repress the anger of past events for me while I ask that.
No, I think I understand what you're saying, because it's something that I think about like a lot. I think what you're asking, because something that I learned, I think at last convention, we all left that experience. We all experienced the same thing, but you experience it differently depending on who you are, how long you've been in the party, what your aspirations within the party were, who you are as a person, whether you were attending as a disabled person or you needed certain accommodations. And so what I learned is like, you can't make people stay in an unsafe space. You can't ask people to stay in an unsafe space. So you have to give them the choice. And what I'm hoping with the petition, I think, is that they get the choice to opt into like a space that's sort of NDP adjacent, that they don't necessarily have to like, let me go to the people that are unsafe with this 300 so far people signed up, and let me be the person that takes the brunt of that, because I'm already out there. And so, I mean, all I know is like, I can't make people come on a path with me, but I can try to offer some protection in the fact that, it's an anonymous petition. And it is something I talk about, I think about a lot, is like, it's a chicken and the egg, because the party's never going to be safe if we don't come together and, exercise our right as grassroots members to be the party. We are the party. But where does that leave people along the way, I guess?
Yeah, because I mean, Kristine, you're throwing up some real big red flags for folks, right? When we're talking about the new Democratic Party, you said things like unsafe spaces, like you acknowledge the party is unsafe, and like, you don't have to convince me of that. I understand exactly what you mean. And, you also acknowledge that you feel like you're sticking your neck out, and you are, right? I know exactly what happens to people who are too loud in critiquing the party, and how uncomfortable other people feel getting behind even that shield that you're, offering to be for people. That is a very draining position to be in. I'm sure you realize that by now, but that's a very cautionary tale, right? Like, I know you're not even asking people to like enter these spaces that they don't want to, but I'm just like, even for the audience there, I can only imagine like a lot of people who have those rose-colored glasses on still are shocked to hear you speak like that about the NDP, right? That sounds and is actually quite nefarious for grassroots members to feel like they are endangered to some degree by advocating for democracy in their party or accessibility in their party. And it's not just you. We've had many, many guests on that feel, asking too many questions puts a target on you even, genuine, well-phrased questions that aren't combative. That's not what's expected of council. You talked about being confused on how a director is just deciding without votes, without clear structure to that decision. And, that is because that position is undefined in our Constitution, and they are allowed to breach that Constitution when they need to. Many documented cases of provincial directors and Anne McGrath, the national director, just completely disregarding the Constitution and saying so to the executive or to council. It doesn't matter if you like this or not. This is the way it's going to be. This isn't a vote. I don't even need your letter of recommendation. We heard around the Ontario Convention shenanigans there. The council was just basically told, deal with it. And you also hit on another point of equity committees not being given the tools to actually do their job. And that's, my answer to that is they were never designed to be what you want them to be. Those are tokens, right? The women's committee, the equity committee, those are to justify the party, to make it look like it's progressive. But in reality, they were never, you know what I mean? Like, there is no email list.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you say that, because I have had a different experience in different spaces. So the reason that I put my name forward to be the BC women's rep is because I had an okay experience being on the Women and Gender Rights Committee on the BCNDP side. So we actually did meet and we put policy resolutions forward, and we would liaise with the ministers and things like that. So, and I've talked to like older New Democrats, people that have like a much longer history in the party than I do. And they report times where it was, committees were active, and like conventions were not just theatrical performances like they would prefer them to be now, like the liberal conventions and things like that. So I don't know. I have this, like, maybe I still have rose-colored glasses. But I think I probably do, because I wouldn't still be like actively volunteering my time in this if I didn't have some hope for the party. But I think that I from those like kind of intergenerational tales that I hear, I feel like the systems are in place. It's supposed to work a certain way. And there is a lot of effort to make it seem like that's how it's working. But it just has been, like you said, there's been increased centralization, increased control at the top. And it's not just our party, it's every party. It's not just electoral politics, it's every institution.
I think that's why, the discussion around how convention is structured, after people get there, right after you make it accessible as possible, because of the need to make sure those committees go nowhere now, right? To keep on that guise of, we are democratic, there are people involved, but we're going to have plenty of examples of how that process is manipulated to thwart many efforts. And like Kristine's right, like there's been actual tactical changes made, that we can document from the time of Mulcair in particular, even at Layton, to be honest, that started to bring power to the top, and where there was an explicit decision made that the resolutions passed at convention would not in any way be obligated to be included in the messaging that the party used from there on in. So that was part of, Jay's question, is just like, okay, let's say we can get as many people there as possible. The powers that be have spent the last few years perfecting those levers of control. But I do think, I know it's a shame, and I do agree it should be hybrid. I imagine the most disruptive you could be would be in person. I would say it's near impossible in a virtual setting to be disruptive, and you need to be disruptive in order to get what you want at convention. Like, it needs to be a surprise, it needs to be coordinated, and there's just too many mute buttons involved virtually that kind of prevent that. So I hope any kind of hybrid option that comes forth, like organizers within the party that do need to connect people and mount efforts, if that's the path you're going in the party, then, that's a difficult task, trying to coordinate people online and in person. I just thinking back to the virtual convention where we had like a Discord and a speaking channel, and people were assigned certain categories, and that was a big learning curve for people to do. So now once you have a hybrid version, it's going to be like, oh my God, where are we at? And meanwhile, head office has kind of been working on this, right? Like you've been working for the last 2 years on how to make it more accessible. They have been working the last 2 years to learn from the mistakes that got us any inroads that we did get in those virtual spaces, right? Like they don't want those refunds again, Jay, and they don't want the bad press that goes with it. But
well, I mean, I think they've banked on in person being easier to control, to be honest.
But who's going to travel? And I can't believe we haven't mentioned this. COVID. Like Anne McGrath's messaging for her explanation doesn't acknowledge the risk that folks will need to take on top of having to have the time and the money, but expose yourself to COVID during travel and during the convention. Masks will not be mandatory. We know this from NDP previous events. They'll be suggested at the door and whatnot. And so immunocompromised people have just been told that they are actually not welcome to shape their party at all. Was that a big part of the drive to make it accessible?
Yeah.
And that's where you get a lot of your support too. The disabled community has been shut out of this party repeatedly.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other one that we hear a lot is climate. Like, why are we all jumping on a fossil fuel aeroplane to do business that could be done from home and would be, better for everyone and the planet? So yeah, I mean, it's all of it. For us, it's just like a no-brainer decision. I do hear what you're saying, where some people, it's so interesting, the different impressions that people have about convention, because I've heard the same thing, like, well, it's not like the virtual was that accessible because there was concern about whether people were speakers lists and things like that could be rigged with technology. I do think sometimes we give the party a little too much credit in terms of like what they're actually thinking about manipulating and what is just like they were totally caught off guard.
But at the end of the day, the party's equity statement says that they can't prevent people taking part in the party. Our constitution says that you cannot prevent people from taking part in the party. The disability committee was saying it. The accessibility was saying you can't make things inaccessible. The executive listened and determined, well, you got to go consult. It makes no sense. The bullshit in the Constitution, the equity statement, all that is front-facing PR. The equity committees are front-facing PR.
One thing I wanted to ask you, Kristine, before we go to Chris, who's going to he's from BC, but is going to focus on the 2018 convention and the joys of trying to get a resolution passed that the party does not want to hit the floor. But that brings me back to the last federal convention, and there was a petition that generated out of BC, but was signed by members across the country in relation to John Horgan and his use of the RCMP on land offenders, Indigenous land offenders, right? A petition to censor him of sorts. And instead, Anne McGrath and those who plan the convention responded by giving him a keynote speaker spot. Right? A lot of us tuned out. We were too busy plotting for the next session of resolutions to listen to that nonsense. But what I get frustrated, I'll be honest, like, why do you think they're going to react any different to this petition? The way that they just spat on all those members that signed last time, right? Like there was like no reaction from the party at all. Like massive efforts to shame them into doing something to stand apart from the actions of the BCNDP in that moment. And instead they highlighted him. It was like a big fuck you to all those people who had openly been critical and had done what you said, go out and make me do this, right? Go out and show that members did not appreciate this in droves. There was no movement. In fact, it was almost spiteful, their reaction, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, I think any time we're doing any type of organizing, I think, especially like on the left, especially progressive, like real progressives, I think we have to expect to lose. you just have to expect that that's what's going to happen. I think Anjali said it best the day after she was disqualified, and she just said power is doing what power was designed to do, but you always have to look at the next thing. So maybe we win on hybrid convention. If we do, that would be a huge signal of the grassroots. If we don't, what's our next thing? But we have to keep, I think the thing that I find frustrating, I think, in these politics, and I get it, because we're all under the terrible pressure of capitalism, is that, people think, okay, I have this one thing and I'm going to, this is the thing that's going to make it happen. And it's never one thing. I think any big social change, and I'm new to activism, honest to God, I think people always think that I'm more I know more than I do. I didn't come from student activism. I don't have a poli-sci degree. I just started volunteering on campaigns when I was 25. But I'm trying to be a quick study. I woke up one day as a mom and was like, holy shit, what did I do bringing children into this world? And so I'm trying to be a quick study. And it seems like there's always these I would call them sprints in organizing. I would say what we did at convention last time, the virtual convention, it was fun. It was exciting. I had a good time. I got to meet a whole bunch of cool folks, but it was a sprint. We didn't really keep the marathon going. And I get why we didn't. People were disappointed. People were, felt shut out, angry, burnt out. But I think maybe that's what we're missing, is that deep organizing, the deep organizing required to unite some front. For me, it's just basic democracy. I think we can all agree we want a more democratic party, and a party that doesn't divide. And that's what this decision is doing, is it's dividing us. It's dividing us on class. It's dividing us on ability. It's dividing us on race. It's dividing us on family situation. And so I think that's why I wanted to do the petition on something that is fundamentally, we can all agree that we all just want a voice.
Certainly, connecting the grassroots through petitions and deep organizing is the only way to go into convention and be effective in any way. The fact that they're siloed off, members are siloed off from one another, is a detriment. So any work that you do there is certainly beneficial, because you're putting like-minded people together. Nothing terrible should come from that, at the very least, right? It's something to build on.
Hope.
So my frustration isn't with you.
I know.
But just, this seeing people kind of go at it and fearing that they'll be let down. But, like you said, it's not like all your eggs are in that basket. We know that it's not the only path for everyone, or even you, right? So thank you for coming on and being so candid and sharing your efforts. And we'll be sure to share the link to the petition through New Demo Chat as well. Thank you, Kristine. So we're going to go to Chris. Chris is going to kind of take us back to 2018. Like I talked about, there was a particular resolution that folks had already spent years trying to gain traction around, to get on floors, convention floors, to debate. This happens in every province. It's around Palestine and Israel. It's a contentious issue within the party for some reason. And although we discovered at the last federal convention that 80 some odd % of people actually supported that particular motion, so once it got to the floor, there was clear support for it. There was certainly a lot of efforts to prevent it. And I just want to give people a little bit of background on resolutions to give them an idea of what we're talking about. Just really high level. Convention is supposed to be a collection of ideas that come from the members, and we discuss, debate on them, and then vote. And then whatever vote passes, those great ideas then become NDP policy. The reality is the same barriers that exist for people getting into convention, the ideas face even more barriers. So they too have to get passed at a local level by a certain threshold with certain time limits and constraints and quorums that need to be met. They need to be structured and worded in a certain way to qualify and categorize correctly. Thousands of members across the country put forth their ideas. So in the end, you have hundreds of resolutions to go over, and the party designs debate time to be very limited. So in reality, out of the hundreds and hundreds of great ideas that are get put forth, you maybe discuss 4 or 5 in each category, 6 or 7 categories. So we don't get to a lot of policy talk.
4 to 5 if you're lucky. More like 2 to 3 maximum.
It's
usually.
like at the beginning, that's slower, the certain sections. But the reality is, Santiago, like we get to exactly how many the party decides, right? Like I do see it happen behind the scenes and whatnot. So it's nothing about this is accidental if you've seen it happen. And so I'll be curious to hear from Chris, like exactly what 2018 was like, because I know a lot of people were frustrated, and that's why it was so exciting when the policy was passed, or a similar policy was passed in 2021. But again, so these resolutions, you have hundreds of them. Well, somehow someone needs to decide which ones are going to go first, right? If we can only get to 3 or 4 a section, how do we know which ones are the most important? And up until the last convention, that was decided by like 5 or 6 people that had been handpicked essentially by the establishment to determine what was most important to all of the NDP members collectively. And usually it's the usual suspects that hit the top prioritization, issues that we are already all decided on. So we will spend 20 minutes to unanimously declare that the NDP is in favor of public health care, even though that has been in our policy book since time immemorial, essentially, right? So that predetermined outcome that we said would be a theme of this discussion, the party wants to make sure certain items rise to the top. Well, they've shifted prioritization a little bit so that it will be done democratically. We'll get into that a little bit later because it's still not even. It's a process that has zero transparency. We know staffers are voting on that with instructions from HQ. We know that union delegates are voting on prioritization with instructions from their folks who do have delegate lists, something grassroots organizers advocating for, Free Palestine do not have. So what happens is whatever HQ and the cooperative unions decide will be the top items that we discuss. That's it, right? So for folks out there that are getting really excited that you have great ideas to put forth for convention, buckle up. You're going to hear what it's like to try to really get one passed. So, Chris, you heard we were talking about convention shenanigans, I think is what you called it, or fuckery. Maybe I can't remember the term you used when you messaged me back.
Yeah, that's the term I used.
Fuckery.
Yeah.
I know exactly what you mean, but I wasn't actually at the 2018. I've heard many stories, though, right? But maybe our audience haven't. So introduce yourself a little bit, and then get right into it. Like, what did you really want to come on here and tell people about? What would they be surprised to hear there?
Well, considering the fact that...
Well, first, who are you? Sorry, that was a 2-part question.
Sure, no problem. So my name is Chris Markovich. I was a federal and provincial NDP member for over 10 years. I worked at the federal head office in Ottawa for a few years on the database project. Many NDP members will know that as Populous. And I was also... the Riding Association president for North Island Powell River on Vancouver Island for the 2019 federal election. And I was also on the executive or the Riding Association for the provincial NDP in the 2017 election, also in the North Island riding. So I have a lot of experience with volunteering, with campaigning, with working closely with parliamentary members, as well as folks in head office and across the ridings. And in 2018, excuse me, the federal convention was held, and one of the many resolutions that actually made it to the policy floor for debate, or was being voted on to be added to the policy book, was a motion on Palestine, and included a call to oppose parliamentary efforts, quote unquote, to undermine nonviolent movements, i.e. BDS, to achieve just resolutions in Israel and Palestine. And that resolution basically wanted to expand on the existing Middle East policy. They wanted to use BDS movement language in the resolution, and it had the support of 28 electoral district associations, the federal counterparts to riding associations for the provincials, and a number of current and former MPs. But it was defeated by, I think, 11 votes at the end, because at the last minute, and I actually watched this happen, there was a huge wave and people were running to get inside, to throw in their vote at the last second before they tile the doors. That's what they do when they, close the doors before the vote is taken. So that included a bunch of staffers, a bunch of MPs, and you can tell which ones were which because, I've never seen people in suits run that fast. Just piling in at the last minute to cast their votes.
Can't trust people in suits.
Yeah, exactly. And the most notable ones were, of course, Alain Laverdiere, who was at the time the foreign affairs critic, Randall Garrison, who has been very vocal in his pro-Israel stance, and Murray Rankin from Victoria. They all went in there last minute and struck it down. Now, the other key notable thing, which actually, if you read an article from Ricochet Media, they go into a lot of detail into what happened that day, as well as a couple of other left-wing media organizations. Not only did they stack the deck in that way against the proponents of that resolution, but they also scheduled the vote at the exact same time that they were putting forward the free tuition resolution prioritization vote. So they made sure that they not only would win, but also that any attempt to, fill the room by supporters would also fail. So there was a lot of, as I mentioned, fuckery that went on that day, that morning. In fact, it was 8:45 on a Sunday morning when they did this. And the proponents of the resolution that I talked to the night before said that it was supposed to be voted on Saturday night, but at the last minute got shuffled to Sunday morning. So they did that on purpose as well. And it's not the only time, we've seen stuff like that happen, as you've no doubt alluded to at the Ontario Convention, and then again in the federal convention a few years later, and what happened with John Horgan in BC. And there's obviously stuff to be said about that as well, no doubt that you've already discussed. But that was the biggest example that I had seen of procedural movements to ensure that what the party wanted, the party got, irrespective of what its members were putting forward. And as you and Jay also noted, it's really hard to get any resolutions to a convention because you have 338 federal ridings. You may not always have that many electoral district associations, but you have a lot of ridings with a lot of resolutions, and it's a lot to pour over. So I'm not discounting the fact that the Executive Council has a lot of work to do. They do, but in the end, there comes a time when you see a resolution that has so much broad support, but gets very, very low on the priority list for a reason. It's not by accident. And I think that's what listeners and viewers of this show may not realize, is that there's a lot more going on than just, oh, well, we didn't win, right? And I was listening to a little bit of the show before I came on and, hearing what Kristine was saying about, sometimes we don't always win, but we'll push this thing and then maybe we'll get there. That's not necessarily the case. Sometimes it doesn't matter how hard you push. There'll always be procedural movements to ensure that you don't win, regardless of how many times you try.
Yeah, that's one of the points like we haven't hit on yet is, you know, the fact that they use Robert's rules, which is terribly inaccessible to most people. You know, they don't spend much time explaining it to anybody. Usually the orientation sessions are during debate sessions, which are coveted, so you're not going to go to them. And they don't even follow it all the time. Everyone can see the chair with the earpiece in and taking direction. You challenge the chair, and it simply just goes to the other chair that was also hired by Anne McGrath or Lucy Watson and have very specific instructions for that predetermined outcome. So it's like this vein of democracy. So it's interesting because I have done in-person conventions, but virtual is so much more fresh in mind. And I have forgotten about all the shenanigans that go on in person in terms of structural, right? And the reprioritization committee and fiasco there is another joke. You're right. Like the Palestine motion for the last Ontario convention was dead last, considering all the organizing that had gone on around it and the efforts that, you know, grassroots folks have to do to reach all these ridings and people to gain traction around an idea. And dead last. And then I sit in a meeting, you know, the reprioritization vote, it turns into a big schmozzle. And Brian Topp just stands up there and just says, nope, that's it. That's what your appeal is. Your appeal is to the same people who told you that it was no priority to them whatsoever. You can make all the arguments you want. You can pack the room with supporters who are vocal about it. And in the end, a party insider just gaveled to the table. No. So I want to juxtaposition that to the successful Palestinian motion, as we call it, in 2021. You know, that was much celebrated. It was really the only bright spot we came out of the last convention with, which since has not done anything to push the party in the right direction. However, you know, it was a victory in that moment, but so hard fought. The filibuster. Y'all remember the filibuster? So, like, if we're talking about fuckery and trying to prevent debate, the Palestine motion, I believe, was number 2 in that particular category. Either way, it came right after a motion to deal with the crisis in India and the farmers in India. And the party had a filibuster ready. It was so horribly orchestrated as well. So a filibuster is when people talk for a particular purpose, like to prevent an outcome. You know, we can't vote on something if we don't get to it, right? So the idea was to take this motion that related to India and stretch it as long as possible. Amendments were made, right? People had these beautifully crafted amendments. They had rebuttals to amendments and speeches drafted for the rebuttal to an amendment. And clearly the idea was they couldn't stretch it long enough, but they were going to allow the Palestine motion to hit the floor, but only enough time to have one pro, one con. They didn't want it to devolve into an actual debate on the issue, right? So again, it's just knowing the amount of control that comes from the director down. And none of this is by mistake. I disagree with Kristine. None of this is because they were overwhelmed. It was carefully crafted and manipulated and orchestrated. And on top of all that, again, there's a need to remind folks that there's a large portion of union delegates that attend convention. That number was increased federally at the last convention, also under really suspicious circumstances. And like, we have to talk about it. This particular motion that was put forth was rated number 1 in its section, even though nobody understood what that motion meant. And the reason it was prioritized number 1 is because we know that union delegates were sent emails telling them to prioritize that number 1. And staffers were also told, and any other delegates that, you know, were getting communications were told to prioritize this particular motion that most members read it and didn't understand. Oh, it wasn't first, it was like second. And
what was that motion?
It increased the percentage of union delegates at convention. So delegates that aren't necessarily NDP members, but that are appointed by their specific unions and then have equal voting power within the convention. So, it starts to make it so that even if you get the numbers, even if you rally the delegates in terms of grassroots, if you want to prioritize issues that aren't, already part of the predetermined outcome, right? These I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine agreements that go on between the unions and the party establishment, that's a real uphill battle at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. And just to finish that off, that this motion passed even though they didn't have time to debate. It was so clear that HQ absolutely needed this to pass without exception. All the rules went out the window. There was still people lined up at the con mic. The time was out. They called to a vote. And even though there was nobody who understood what that motion did, I wish we had the wording. It was just so convoluted, included numbers nobody understood. And it passed. And it's just, I don't think people realize that until, because I know when I was sitting in the Discord in that last virtual convention, there were so many people just shocked by the resistance and the fuckery. Like they didn't expect it, even though they're in politics and it's part of politics. And I guess it was really disheartening. So how did you feel in that, moment in 2018 when you're seeing that resistance and then losing by 11 votes? That's maddening.
Yeah, I wasn't as affected by that particular vote. I don't think I really thought about it that much until I came back. And in BC, I'd actually signed an open letter to then Premier John Horgan, calling on them to stop Site C. And watching the series of events that unfolded after that open letter was sent, and then the subsequent BCNDP convention the following year, it was clear that no one was going to listen to us, because we had, I don't recall exactly how many. You can look it up in the Tyee. There's an article in there. I think we had something like at least 100 to 200 signatures from various, folks within the party, various, organizations, activists. We were all NDP members, and we were all calling on them to put a stop to it. And the message that we got over and over and over was, it's past the point of no return. And at that time, the project, I believe, was around $8 to $10 billion. And we are now at the point, and the project is still not finished, by the way. And there's been lots of stuff that's been happening in the last number of months that have delayed the project even further. And now we're looking at a cost of over $20 billion. And that's before the project is ever finished. So it could go even higher than that. And it was then that several people close to me decided to tear up their memberships, including the then president of the provincial writing association that I was a member of. She publicly tore up her membership and said, "I'm leaving the party. I'm done. If you guys won't even listen to your own members on this open letter, there's no point in me being a member anymore." And that really, I think, kind of shook me, because I saw fuckery on the federal and the provincial side. And, it was only confirmed for me when I went to convention and, saw some of the same stuff happening, certain resolutions getting prioritized over others, a lot of the same rhetoric being used with little to no, real policy being implemented. And, getting back to what you said about, the resolution and priority and the fact that there was really little to no debate. I haven't looked at the party's constitution in a few months, but I don't know what's been updated. I'm willing to bet much of what was discussed at the last few conventions hasn't been put into the policy book, and likely never will. The Palestine resolution may have, gotten the thumbs up in terms of the votes, but it got almost no attention, right? And again, like you said, that's for a reason. But when 2020 rolled around and the second raid on Wet'suwet'en territory took place by the RCMP, which again is controlled by the provincial government, i.e. the BCNDP. It was at that point I said I was done with the party. So that's kind of like a little bit of the timeline as to where, where my loyalties lay and, where my moral compass turned. And I decided I just couldn't be a member anymore. I couldn't deal with, the kind of revolving door of, big business and, industry lobbyists is effectively taking over, political parties. In BC and Alberta in particular, the oil and gas industry has huge pull with the NDP. And it's their ties to the federal party and the federal party's lack of backbone in calling them out on their bullshit that's really, really highlighted here. And I think that going into this Alberta election, we've actually seen that already come into play. Rachel Notley herself has said that, she supports the oil and gas industry, that, we should be working with them. Alberta NDP recently announced that they're going to be eliminating the corporate tax rate or keeping it as low as possible, even lower than the Saskatchewan government, which are conservatives.
I'm just gonna interrupt you there because we are gonna have a discussion down the road on like how this then impacts policies down the road and the erasure of socialism. But thank you for your contributions in terms of convention.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we just have 15 minutes left in the live stream, and I'm going to transition onto internal elections within the convention. So we're going to sign off with you, Chris. I really appreciate your input there, and we're definitely going to be in touch in terms of talking about NDP policy and how that's really let folks down. So
awesome. Well, thank you for having me here. As you've noticed, I'm always willing to have a chat, and I will go at length if I need to.
Awesome.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you. I just wanted to add something too about what Chris said there. I don't so much think it's a lack of backbone that comes from the federal party, but the fact that they actually agree with what's happening, that they maybe don't personally agree with the actions of the RCMP, but that playing the popular position is what's needed in politics, that Machiavellian approach, and they're perfectly content with each provincial party doing what it thinks it needs to be popular, not right,
And what's frustrating about that is it doesn't even work, Like they've just given up on any sort of moral position, and they keep going more and more authoritarian, and it doesn't get them any more seats. It doesn't get them any more votes. Like all of these messes, like about all these questions about how do you plan a convention properly? How would you what would the ideal be? Well, the truth is the answer lies within the thousands of members. I think about like the last episode where you're talking about how, there's always people with creative solutions within a movement. And, the answers are there if you empower the people to bring those solutions. But instead, that holding on to control is costing them so much. It's not even justifiable on like if you abandon morals and you're like, okay, authoritarianism is needed for efficiency to actually no, it doesn't even work because they're not winning anything. So it's just it's just so frustrating, Do
they want to win, or is their system predicated on not winning?
That's the question.
Well, their salary is not dependent on either, these people making the decisions. But yeah, we wanted to talk about the impact, and that is one of the impacts, Santiago, is they alienate the very people they require free labor from, right? This is the party that, is doing better in fundraising, but still lags behind the other parties. So come election time, it does require people to spend a lot of their free time. They need to be inspired. And when just like in anything, you see this happen over and over again. Like you see Kevin Clark bursting into the Toronto mayor's debate because he was not given any avenue to speak, right? And so then he needs to be disruptive to be heard. And that is what happens with members, right? So their petitions are met with hostility, suspicion, and then ignored or worse, like a spiteful kind of response. Yeah, investigations. And organizing a convention is met with the same kind of resistance and whatnot. And there are no other avenues in between. And so what happens to people when they are denied a voice over and over and over again, they either rip up their membership cards and leave and find other avenues, the avenues that Blueprints of Disruption points folks to, right? Actual activism, or they suffer. Right? They get burnt out. They get disillusioned. We lose them. They drink the Kool-Aid. They think that that's what's needed to win. And only an NDP win is what will solve the world's problems. And they will do whatever it takes to get there. Right. And then you talk to people in BC who did that, who got their people elected, who participated in their conventions and got on their executive, and they're fucking nowhere. Worse. Right. So I don't know, Santiago, we talk about this a lot. Where we truly believe that the only solution is to essentially burn it down. And we don't say that publicly very often, and we give space to people who do want to fight within the party, and I get that. But to be candid, you folks are wasting people's energy and giving them hope where there is none, to be honest. This episode was to point out to people that go to conventions, spend hundreds of dollars, get someone to watch your kids, travel, expose yourself to COVID. You will just end up burnt out, disappointed, maybe a few more contacts, but you could have made those in better spaces.
Yeah, that's essentially like that is what it is, because nobody left that convention feeling inspired or motivated. Like I remember the energy around, like the Discord chat and everything before and afterwards, and just how burnt out everyone was after. And you think of how much weight, like we talk a lot about wasted energy on the left, and like just how much wasted energy goes into everything around convention, all of this energy into getting these resolutions created and then trying to get them passed. And even if they pass, it doesn't matter because they're not even going to put it in the policy book, or they're not ever going to talk about it again. And it's all like it just disappears into the void. And when it comes to the actual election, they'll just say whatever they think is popular and not at all reflective of what the members actually want. And then they'll lose the election. And then it's like all of this energy. Just wasted. Anywhere else would be more efficient, anywhere else. Like it does almost feel like, like a controlled opposition where it's just like this hole created for us to like waste our time and
right. Like when you pay to be a member of something, you don't expect to have to battle your way through it all. That's not right. That's not right. And I know it's the reality, but like you don't actually have to be in that space at all, right? Like you don't have to be a convention to push an issue at all. Not at all. If you want them to move on free transit, if you want them to move on real reconciliation or whatever the issue is, you need to get as many people as possible to make as much noise as possible, and not on the convention floor where the doors are tiled, like out in public where people who aren't involved in the party can make noise, who you can reach more people. But you can see when Kristine's talking, and from my experience getting kicked out of the party, that like when you organize like that, you that fear is built in, that repercussion is built in. And that's really damaging to folks who want to keep working in those circles. I said we'd talk about internal elections and also that we'd have a hard stop. So I'll give folks the Coles notes, right? Like we definitely have to talk about at convention, the executive is elected. You heard Kristine talk about it. Council is selected through all these different means that, we can't get into the details. But the Constitution says that it's those people that run the party, right? Just like a government, those are our MPs, our MPPs. Those are different representatives for different equity-seeking groups and locals and all kinds of whatnot. And they're supposed to make the decisions, right? So those elections are supposed to be really important. And the same fuckery that Chris talked about happens around the elections. I can tell you firsthand, I've run in quite a few of them now. And they do whatever it takes. It's manipulative. It's an advantage is given to the slate of candidates that are selected by the establishment, a clear advantage, things like access to meetings that we are not afforded, access to lists of delegates that we are not afforded, instructions that we are not afforded, endorsements from MPs and MPPs they are explicitly told you don't endorse anybody outside of who you've been told to endorse, regardless of how you feel about them or how you've worked with them in the past. And so the predetermined outcome is very important in these elections. So much so that even an MPP took a spot on the council or on the executive in the last Ontario convention. Sarah Singh got a spot, even though they already have a very influential position in the party, took it away from a member who paid hundreds of dollars to go to convention, launched a campaign from scratch. And meanwhile, an MPP just puts up their name, lines their friends behind them, and then again, gets a vote in the say. So it's ironic. Jay was attacked a lot for saying this, but those folks that make up the executive and the council, they can remove that director that we have spent episodes and episodes talking about how they rule the party, a Democratic Party, in a very authoritarian way, in a way that centralizes the politics of the party and isolates its members, does really horrible things, like things that just should not fucking happen and that many of you pay to happen, and promote it out of fear of the alternative. And that's normalizing this shit, right? I think participation in convention at this point, unless you are actively mobilizing against what the status quo is going to be offering, you're just contributing to this, to be honest. That sounds, it feels really harsh. I normally try to walk that line a little lighter, but it's really frustrating to see people still think that simply getting people to convention isn't just going to burn more people out.
Can I ask something about, you had talked about internal elections.
So briefly.
I have a feeling, and I want this out there for people to start questioning it. I believe that the inaccessibility of this convention, the federal convention, is for a very specific reason. They're trying to protect Jagmeet one more time. Just like we saw with Andrea, just like we saw in Saskatchewan and in BC with their leadership races, I believe they don't want the pissed off grassroots members being able to have a vote. They've invested everything in the social media presence of their icon or whatever the mascot's called now. But the more popular he is, the more money he generates internally, the more job security there is for the person who, the director is the person who controls everything, who has infected everything, and is the one person members can gather and call for a vote to remove. They're doing everything at every place that members can gather to have an impact, and they're controlling it. So do you think that potentially one of the main reasons for this fuckery is to protect Jagmeet?
Yeah. And it reminded me of another point that we have to tell everybody. This is such a burn on the NDP, and we love to burn them, honestly. Sorry for folks who don't like that. They tried to hold this in Manitoba. Manitoba said, fuck no, because Jagmeet's image right now is so toxic nationally, and his saddling up to power at a time where most people are suffering. So whether or not you agree with that deal that they've made, most Canadians are not sitting very well with it, as we can see. And Manitoba in particular was just like, no, you're not coming anywhere near us during election period. Get that convention out of here. So they had to delay it and put it in Hamilton. I believe one other place actually rejected it, but I can't confirm that. And absolutely, this is a la Andrea, right? So a reminder that the Ontario provincial convention was purposely delayed to the massive objection by members who were dying to get rid of Andrea at the time. And they positioned that timing so that it would happen so close to the election against Ford that members would dare not risk having no leader going into that election. We had no choice but to approve Andrea for another run at it. And that was because the people who controlled how convention shapes up are tied to Andrea's reign. Their job essentially when you lose that bad and you lose your leader, generally you walk away. And that's what happened. Michael Balagas did almost immediately have to walk away. That's Andrea's chief of staff. And then Lucy Watson now she is stepping away. And that was a natural transition after losing so many elections. So they are not making decisions based on what would be good for the membership, what would be even good for the party, what would be good for Canada or Canadians or whatever kind of shit you think politics is for. They're doing it to protect their jobs, just like most other people that need to pay the bills and have almost no scruples or courage to do the right thing, regardless of what it costs them. They are just designing this for their jobs, right? And we all suffer as a result. That's why, like, we put so much emphasis on these director positions, because they got to go, right? Any democratic institution can't be ruled from the top like that with someone who has such a vested interest in having the status quo maintained.
This feels like just a big metaphor for capitalism itself, you know? And much like in all things capitalism, like getting rid of the directors is good, but like it's always a certain kind of person that ends up in those positions, you know? It's the same thing like when we get angry at CEOs and it's like, well, what would happen if we actually got rid of them? They'll be replaced by another asshole who's going to do the same thing, right? And this really shows like if your goal is to tackle capital, like to dismantle capitalism, the NDP can't even dismantle capitalism within its own structure, like within its own party. Like
they still use first past the post, so don't talk to me about electoral reform.
Yeah, like just to be like absolutely clear, this is not the place to do it because they can't even dismantle that internally.
Donate today.
Before midnight.
Yeah.
We've died. Absolutely. And I think we've done a good job of kind of demonstrating, you know, this portion of it in terms, we've hinted at other things and, you know, candidate nominations and all of this other jazz, but you know, to really understand how contrived and controlled a convention is to really understand Canadian democracy. Because although it rails against NDP members in a way I don't think Liberal members care about, or, you know, Conservatives clearly are okay with authoritarianism to a degree, it doesn't rub them the same way as it does us. So it's very detrimental to progressives in this country, right? Because so many of us have or their hopes tied up in the party, and then this is the reality. So most of the time we point you guys in really good directions in terms of activism and organizations. Our last episode was with Justice for Workers. You can be far more effective helping out organizations like that and connecting with people like that than you can paying hundreds of dollars to go to a convention or, you know, spending all of your labor with a party that does not actually want your voice to be heard at all and go through great lengths and spend a lot of money to silence your voice deliberately. None of this is by accident. I will not cede any of that ground. I've faced enough of that response from people, and I've just seen how organizers work, and I know how to throw virtual events. And so I absolutely know that it's deliberate when they isolate us and cut us off and not have closed captioning on. That's because you can then get a transcript of what happened in that meeting. You know, there's all kinds of reasons that they put in the controls that they do, and it's all absolutely by design. So thank you to people who contributed in the chat. Sorry if we kind of fell off and we missed anybody. This conversation is obviously going to continue. Like I said, we do inside the NDP episodes a lot on Blueprints, is to explain power structures. We understand that there's people inside still fighting like Kristine. And also people who need to be validated in the fact that they've left, right? So you can't change a power structure you don't understand. You can't create better ones when you don't know at least what the bad examples are. So Peter's question, how we can do better, you know, hopefully we've kind of helped answer that by demonstrating what people actually want out of a convention. And again, there's a lot of organizations out there that can demonstrate to you exactly what inclusivity looks like, accessibility looks like, and empowerment looks like. And it's not in the NDP. Big shout out to the folks who came on our Zoom and the guests that maybe we missed for technical difficulties, and the fact that we throw these together last minute all the time. It's just because that's how we roll. So thank you for being patient with us and checking in with us. And I think you guys want to say goodbye? We sign off?
I would
Okay.
like to say, to your point and to workers or justice for workers, I fought forever to get the NDP to give a shit about my riding, give me anything, nothing for years. Justice for workers during the educational workers strike. I reached out to them randomly to host an event here. They sent me flyers or posters in English, posters in French, a whole bunch of resources within days. And the Ontario NDP refused to double the ODSP rate, the Disability Support Program rate, saying they campaigned on 20% regardless of years of internal fighting. And then the public outrage changed their position during the campaign almost instantly. Jessa has said many times that the NDP exists to de-radicalize people. It is very important not to put your whole life into the NDP. Exist in other spaces.
Yeah, for me, I guess just the last thing to end off, and it's just what the NDP is a toxic relationship. You know, they take advantage of the good nature of people that want to change things, that want to do good work. And it's, as Jane just said, like, it's either de-radicalization or burnout, one of the two. You don't end up there.
Both.
Yeah, both. You don't often end up being able to contribute more. Like, even if you're doing the NDP and other things, like just the energy that it costs you ends up burning you out from being able to do other things so much. And I've seen it happen to so many people over and over again. So just like, you know, on Blueprints, like there are just so many different organizations and movements, and the guests are always talking about literally any of those is a better use of your time. Like literally any of them,
Except the Green Party.
and yeah, no, and if you can't find like one that speaks to you, like it's go out and make it, and you know, like literally anything. The NDP is not worth the time or the emotional energy that it takes, and yeah, no, just it's not. That's
Well,
my.
I hope
that's
you've all
I got.
enjoyed this cautionary tale and this uplifting segue to our end. But have a good evening, everybody. Keep disrupting. That is a wrap on another episode of Blueprints of Disruption. Thank you for joining us. Also, a very big thank you to the producer of our show, Santiago Helou Quintero. Blueprints of Disruption is an independent production operated cooperatively. You can follow us on Twitter at BP of Disruption. If you'd like to help us continue disrupting the status quo, please share our content, and if you have the means, consider becoming a patron. Not only does our support come from the progressive community, so does our content. So reach out to us and let us know what or who we should be amplifying. So until next time, keep disrupting.